All right, so I'm going to talk about the legal and policy underpinnings of the charitable deduction, why it should be taken off the table as a source of government revenue. I'll argue that our thinking about the charitable deduction needs to evolve to take into account its true purpose, which is to protect American civil society from crowding out by the government through taxation.
A little louder, please.
Sure thing. I'll propose a paradigm of neutrality, which is fundamentally different from the way we're used to thinking about the charitable deduction as a government subsidy. Everyone wants more from the tax base. As you can see from this simple equation, the amount of tax revenue that the government can raise from an income tax is a product of two things: the tax rate, which is currently 39.6% for the top bracket, and the tax base, which is how the law defines taxable income. Look first at just the blue arrows. Say you want to increase tax revenue, the blue arrow on the left, but you want to leave rates where they are. What you have to do to get that result is to change the way the law defines taxable income so that you multiply the rate times a larger number. That'll get you more tax revenue, and that's what Democrats want to do. Now look at the red arrows. Say you do not want to increase the amount of tax revenue that the government gets, but you do want to lower tax rates. You need to multiply the lower tax rate times a larger number, and in order to do that, you need to change the way the law defines what taxable income is. This is what Republicans want to do. As you can see, Democrats and Republicans agree on something. They want to increase the tax base, and this is why we're in trouble. Here's a list of things that the government does not currently tax, but it could if it wanted to. It's a menu, if you will. These are things that are not defined as part of the tax base, but they could be. As you can see, the charitable deduction is high up on the list at $229 billion. So the charitable deduction is big game, but is it fair game? All of the proposals that we've been hearing about involving the charitable deduction change the definition of income in a way that increases the amount the government takes in charitable gifts. Proposals to eliminate the charitable deduction, to cap it at 28%, to put a floor on it, or to subject it to fees, all increase the government's take from charitable gifts. It's easy to see why the government wants to do this. It just wants the money. But we have to be adults here and ask the question, is this a good idea? All right, we've been talking a lot about the tax base already. What is it? The tax base is a product of law, specifically the internal revenue laws of the United States. Like all laws, the laws creating the tax base reflect the culture, the history, the beliefs, and the values of the people who enact them. The tax base is the accumulation of a century's worth of decisions dating back to the enactment of the income tax. So we should talk about the underlying norms, culture, and history of America and why Congress thought it was a good idea to exempt charitable gifts from the tax base back in 1917. Every charity begins with a gift. It is through gifts that we create, fund, and operate the organizations that make up American civil society. We're going to talk a lot about American civil society because that is what we mean when we talk about charity in the tax sense. It's not the narrow sense of relief of poverty, it's the broader sense of civil society in general. So let me give you a definition of civil society. Civil society is the space outside government, business, and family. As you'll see in a minute, civil society is one of the foundations of American civilization. At its core, civil society is about self-reliance. It's ordinary people gathering together to provide for the common good by helping the needy, healing the sick, teaching the ignorant, worshiping as they choose. Before there is government, there is charity. Alexis de Tocqueville observed this as America's most important feature. The self-reliance of American civil society is what gave birth to American democracy. Civil society is about variety. It's made up of churches, schools, arts organizations, it's homeless shelters, it's disaster relief organizations, it's medical organizations as well as civil rights, it's sports leagues and veterans associations. The list is as diverse as America is itself. Civil society does not require sovereign permission. Sovereign control over civil society is the reason our founding fathers fled from Europe for America during the colonial period. Unlike the old world, in America, each of us has the right to envision what is in the public interest. We also have the right to put our money where our mouth is by making charitable contributions. Sovereign control over civil society is a really big theme here, and you'll see in a minute how the charitable deduction prevents it. The charitable deduction removes charitable gifts from the tax base. This makes sense from a tax policy perspective because charity consumes the gift rather than the donor. So it does not make sense to tax the donor on the gift. In this picture, the cake is the tax base. And when we give a piece to charity, the cake gets smaller. The tax base gets smaller, but so does the amount that we are able to consume ourselves. So there's a symmetry there that makes sense from a tax policy perspective. One of the consequences of removing charitable gifts from the tax base is that the after-tax cost of giving goes down. This is a point that tax lawyers love to make because we're always looking for ways to save our clients money. But we have to be careful not to be too narrow. The charitable deduction is a tax rule, and the tax consequences are important, but its purpose is much, much deeper than that. The purpose of the charitable deduction is to form a boundary between the state and civil society. The charitable deduction does two things. One, it protects civil society from government crowd out through misguided efforts to expand the tax base, like we're witnessing today. And two, it protects civil society from government control. You can see why the boundary is important from this chart, which shows US tax rates over the history of the income tax. As you can see, there have been times, such as during World War I and World War II, when the government's need for revenue was so extreme that tax rates hit 77% in World War I and 94% in World War II. Did they sacrifice the charitable deduction to pay for those wars? No. In fact, it was the need to pay for World War I that inspired Congress to enact the charitable deduction in the first place. After all, they reasoned, there would be little point in fighting a war to defend the American way of life, only to turn around and sacrifice the very thing that defines us as a nation. Here's what they said. The time may come when the government will have to choose between national defense on the one hand and the continuance of educational and philanthropic institutions. We may have to turn our schools and hospitals and playgrounds into battleships and ammunition, but that time has not yet come, even in France, which was further along, of course, in World War I. The charitable deduction prevents the government from consuming civil society through taxation. Remember the cake we talked about earlier. This is what will happen to that piece that is supposed to go to charity if we don't do something about it. Here's what we need to do. We need to change the paradigm. Incentive and subsidy are the wrong tools for the job, like trying to pound in a screw with a hammer. We need to start talking about the charitable deduction as the means of ensuring government neutrality towards civil society. Here's one thing that's wrong with thinking about the charitable deduction as a government subsidy. Subsidy is inconsistent with freedom. I'll demonstrate this through a simple logical syllogism that leads to a crazy result. All right, so bear with me as we walk through this. As you may know, under current law, the government may restrict the speech of those receiving government funds. This is pretty simple. when you take government money, the government can tell you what to do with the money. All right. The next step, a government subsidy involves the use of government funds. So government subsidy is economically equivalent to taking the money directly. So number 3, this is where the problem is. If the charitable deduction is a subsidy, then the government can control any organization that received money from a donor who claimed a tax deduction. This is the crazy result. It cannot be right as a constitutional matter, because the whole point of America is that our government cannot control civil society. So if something smells fishy to you, it's the subsidy paradigm, which is something cooked up by tax lawyers. It's time to get rid of it. We've been through this all before. In 1819, the state of New Hampshire tried to seize control of Dartmouth College, which is a private institution and part of American civil society. The government argued that when the donor made the gift, he was really making a gift to the people, and the government, as the people's representative, had the right to control the gift. The Supreme Court disagreed, and its decision confirmed that there should always be a boundary separating government and civil society, even in a democracy, and that's what this case was about. They said, well, the king is gone, we're in a democracy now, civil society has nothing to fear from a democracy. The Supreme Court said, well, au contraire, we do have something to fear, and the boundaries in the world. Fast forward 200 years and we're back in the same place. The argument today is that the charitable deduction is a subsidy and therefore a gift from the government that the government may control. Subsidy theory is wrong because it turns the charitable deduction into the government's Trojan horse. A Trojan horse is a gift that holds soldiers inside. When you accept the gift, you also accept the control. This is why we need to reject the subsidy paradigm. The other problem with the subsidy paradigm is that the government is under no obligation to provide or continue a subsidy. It can simply turn off the spigot if it finds that it has a better use for the money. We cannot let this happen. This is what Daniel Webster said when he argued the Dartmouth College case, and his words moved the Supreme Court to tears. He said, "Shall our state legislature be allowed to take that which is not their own, to turn it from its original use and apply it to such ends or purposes as they in their discretion shall see fit? Sir, you may destroy this little institution. It is weak, it is in your hands. You may put it out, but if you do, you must carry on with your work. You must extinguish one after another all those great lights of science, which for more than a century have thrown their radiance over the land. It is, sir, as I have said, a small college, and yet there are those who love it." Thank you very much.